All right, let's do this thing. Howdy, I am James Victore, and this podcast is called The Right Questions. And it's a funny thing. It's called The Right Questions. And I thought about this the other day. Without questions, it's just called The Right, which really makes no sense at all. So remember, listen, share your questions. Share your questions. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you get paid to do what you love and possibly stay sane in the process. And if you keep your questions to yourself, then you rob not only you of the answer, but you rob everybody else who has that same questions, right? Because in the particular lies the universal. The things that you love and the things that you fear are the things that I love and I fear. So the more honest we can be, and the more vulnerable, meaning, sharing our questions, the more we can help each other. Right? So share your struggles. I want to know. Share your pain. Hell, share your pain. And, share your, hey, James, how the hell do I do this thing? Right? So be a good neighbor, be a good friend, and ask questions. In today's podcast, we're talking about this, the question we're talking about is this field, art, creativity, whatever you call, is this field saturated? Interesting question. And it came from, I pulled this out of an article that not a friend, somebody I know, a compatriot, I guess, wrote on LinkedIn. And that word came up, and it sparked something in me. I thought, you know what? I got to talk about that. This idea of being saturated. It's in the air. It came up in a couple places for me recently. So is this field saturated, or are there too many of us? And me, of course, I suffer from word association, so I can hardly put 5 words together without it associating with something. And that idea of there too many of us made me think of this song called Let's Have a War. Where the constant refrain is, there's too many of us, there's too many of us, there's too many of us, there's too many of us. Okay, enough of that. Okay, early in my career, when I started as a designer, I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted. I knew where I wanted to be. I knew I wanted my name on the door. I knew I wanted to sit at a drawing board and drink coffee all day. Like you, I was born creative. I knew what I wanted, and I would not let anyone tell me otherwise. I mean, hence the name of my first book, Who Died and Made You Boss? Right? That was the term, that was the phrase my dad would throw around whenever one of us, I've got 2 older sisters, whenever one of us stepped beyond the perimeter, the known boundaries, the barbed wire that was set up in the family, right? Like, you do something that's beyond your pay grade, and he's like, hey, who made you boss, right? Who died and made you boss? But I was gonna be boss. I was fucking gonna be boss. Especially, I was gonna be boss of my own creativity. Something for you to think about. And I was in a lucky situation. I'll have to tell you the whole story at some point. I was in a lucky situation where I was very hip to artists and graphic designers by the time I was like 11, right? And I had read a lot about designers. I'd seen a lot of work that had happened around the world through Olympic posters and posters about war. And I had heard the big name designers like Milton Glaser and Seymour Quast. And one in particular that struck a chord with me early on, who has zilch niente influence on me as a designer, but his name was Herb Lubalin. But he was like the classic New York graphic designer. And I kind of dug him because I read a book about him, and I dug him because I knew that he showed up very early at work and just started working. And then his assistants would show up in the studio, and they would slide, a coffee in front of him and a plate of eggs in front of him, and he would eat that, right? And he just kept on working. And he said he was very quotable, and he said a number of things that stuck with me early in my career. And one of them was that he just takes care of the work and lets the work take care of him. And I thought that was lovely. And that was kind of the career that I envisioned for myself. But Herb was influential to me for a bunch of reasons. Because I remember when Herb Lubalin died, or I heard that Herb Lubalin had died. And it was just before I moved, just before I moved to New York City. Because it goes like this. I wanted to go to New York. I wanted to be a designer. I knew where I wanted to go. And I figured if one came off of the top, boop, one fits in on the bottom. Right? Like you take one off the top, somebody else comes in the door. So it was my turn. It was my turn to get into the party, right? Someone left early. So I took off to New York City with a dream and $1 in my pocket, just like some kid gonna make it on Broadway. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone at all, right? I was 19. I was fresh off the frickin' farm, right? But by the time I was 21, I had already reached heights that I didn't believe I would. I was asked to leave art school already. Sounds like an illustrious start, right? But listen, I was working professionally 3 weeks later. So I was in the game and starting to look around. And back then, the field felt manageable. I made my way through New York. I went to where I was supposed to go. I knew all the publishing houses and the creative directors and got to know some other designers, right? I got to know everybody, kind of even globally because I was curious and I wanted to be in the game. And I sent letters and I sent fan letters to magazines and to designers. Even the designers I looked up to from around the world, like the big names that I had read about when I was a kid, I got to know them personally. I got to know all the living big guys and gals. And I was asked to join the Alliance Graphique Internationale, the AGI, when it was still kind of a manageable, right? Again, it was manageable. We all kind of knew each other. It was like the good old boys club, quite frankly. And who knows? Maybe they thought, I'm sure they thought the field was too saturated. And they would look at me and go, who the hell is this punk coming in here? Right now, you're thinking, oh man, I wish James Victore could be my mentor, my guru. Hell, I wish he was my coach. Well, you can make that happen. Go to yourworkisagift.com. There's a questionnaire that will probably help you out, but it'll also give you access to a free call. So let's talk. Let's free you from overwhelm and creative frustration. Let's build your business and help you get paid to do what you love. Again, go to yourworkisagift.com. Let's talk. And then something amazing happened, and I was in a position, I wasn't really an adult, but I was an adult enough to see it, and I was working professionally, and I'd learned my chops at a drawing board with a T-square, right? And then came this thing called the internet. And literally the field exploded. Like the internet and Facebook and early social media attempts, work was popping up everywhere. Websites were popping up everywhere. And you didn't know who or where it was coming from. You couldn't tell who it was, right? Was this some big name guy who'd been working in the field for 30 years, or some hotshot teenager putting up a website with work that was decent, right? No track record, just like going for it. Because previously, we only had books. We had books of the work that had been through the many sphincters of critics. That's how you succeeded. Your work survived going through all these assholes going, yeah, okay, we'll let that one go. And as a creative or a writer or a poet or anybody, you had to jump through a few hoops to get published, right? You had to follow the rules and go through this process to get into the funny papers. And now those old rules and standards were somewhat gone. That was the democratization that everyone was talking about, right? The computer and the internet was going to level the playing field. And you either loved that or you hated that. And I remember a conversation with Paul Rand that I had, and he hated it. he hated that. You know, he was somebody who said, no, you've got to go through the sphincters and come out clean. So you couldn't tell who was putting the work out into the world. Was it the real deal or just a one-trick pony? And I admit, it felt weird. And I was afraid of getting lost. And I thought, how are all these creatives getting paid? And are they getting paid at all? The field definitely felt glutted. It felt saturated. But somehow, work stood out. Somehow, good folks, stood out. These creatives always existed, but now they could make themselves seen and heard. They'd always had a voice and an opinion, but now they had an open mic. So they focused on their work, and they were consistent in showing it. And they took all avenues open, social media, publishing, and they learned to write and talk about their work. And they niched down or chose not to and became known for doing something, whether it was strong or silly or poetic or just beautiful. And they asked to get on the stage. See that? They asked to get on stage. Like that's my hint for you today. If you want to get on stage, it's like, hey, I've always wanted to talk. Well, just go ask. Don't wait. Just go ask. And they asked to be seen. Remember that lesson? It goes like this. Practice this one. Hey, look at me. Look what I can do. And they even started fucking with and learning the system. He learned how to hack computers and code and write their own and make it work for them and create art by doing that. I mean, egads, aren't there rules about that thing? that's like me as a kid, like just unscrewing the telephone and trying to make it work a different way. It was like, wait, no, you don't do that. But this kind of play, introduced and intermeshed with technology, this is where AI comes from. So this new genre, this new breed, whether they're young or old, it doesn't matter because they're new, they understood that rules are for chumps. So they ignored the old traditional channels. And hell, listen, I have pals who are adult, creative professionals who are frustrated because they stuck with the old traditional channels. And man, as Bob Dylan said it, and Ludacris said it, move, bitch, get out the way, right? And these guys just kept going, and they were consistent. Yes, the art and creativity field, every field, has always been saturated. But yet somehow, there are always popping up new jeans companies. New sneakers companies. New cars keep coming and going, right? A whole new definition of car is invented, and then maybe it's gone. New technology for listening to music comes and goes. New gluten-free options. How about that? And all these new designers popping up, many of them are kicking butt. And because good always works. Good always works. Good asks for help. Good asks questions. Remember what I was saying, talking about asking questions? Good does its homework, and it trusts itself. And it trusts its own answers and its own opinion. And it trusts that its audience will show up and support them. That the audience will be there when they're ready. Right? Right? It's just like a mentor. The mentor will appear when the student is ready. And good practices every damn day. Every day. You're a writer? Write every day. You're a poet? Poet every day. Go poet. Sorry, I'm busy poeting. Don't bother me. I've got poeting going on. And good learns the basics of business. Because that's getting paid to do what you love. Right? You don't have to get an MBA. Learn the basics. If you're creating and you're on your own and you're an artist or designer or musician or a poet, right? Learn the basics. Get paid to do what you love. And then what happens is good eventually becomes great. That's just how it works. There are no shortcuts. And that's how good beats saturated. That's how good stands out. But really, the show is called The Right Questions, right? So what's the right question here? Is it about being saturated? Is it about, there's too many of us, there's too many of us, there's too many of us, there's too many of us? Is that the right question? Because this podcast is about looking deeper. Literally finding the right question. And the right question here is not, is this field saturated? But the right question would perhaps be put more intimately, more meaningfully, if we actually ask the truth. And the truth is, who would want me? Oh, I just do this thing. I just do these doodles. I just think they're funny. I just make up these funny puns, like feck perfection. They don't really mean much. Who would want that? So, isn't the saturated idea basically just kind of like a wimp looking for a reason not to start in the first place? Someone looking around at all the talent in the world and getting overwhelmed. Or someone judging and comparing themselves. And what happens when you judge your work? So don't judge, just make. You're not entitled to judge. You're not good enough to judge. You're a bad judge of your good looks, of your sense of humor, of your sensuality. We all are. And stop comparing yourself to everything around the world, because when you judge and you compare, you're going to end up feeling less. So stop looking around before you've contributed anything. And definitely stop giving in before you've done anything. So the right question is, who would want me? And the answer is, everyone. Well, almost. I say almost because you know as well as I know, even somebody as wonderfully talented and opinionated as myself, I am not for everyone. Just the sexy people. That's how you find an audience, right? So the answer is, everyone would want you. The world needs more good. And the world needs more you. And no one's going to ask you to do that except me. And it's up to you to give it to them. So go practice being good. And don't skip practicing being brave. And then give them hell. I'm James Victore. This is The Right Questions, a podcast supported by you and created by your questions. So thank you for that. I love you, and we'll talk to you again. Adios.